Hello from Blue Willow Bookshop in Houston, Texas. My name is Kathy Berner, and I'm the event coordinator at the shop. We are so honored to host this virtual event celebrating the launch of In Memoriam, Alice Winn's debut novel. This is a novel that Valerie has said cut her to the bone, and I have called simply gorgeous. Every staff member who has read it has absolutely loved it, and we know you will too. Please, please, please join me in welcoming the very talented Alice Winn to the screen.
Hi.
Hi, Alice. How are you?
Hello. I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a thrill. What a lovely thing.
Well, we're thrilled too. Congratulations on the publication of this gorgeous thing. This gorgeous, gorgeous thing.
Thank you so much.
I saw on your Instagram feed, I saw the photos from Waterstones displays.
They've really gone for it. So Waterstones, it's really interesting. It's kind of like Barnes and Noble, except that they empower the booksellers of the individual shops to have a lot more like independence and control. And I guess they must have a budget or something, because these shop fronts are so artistic. Like there was one where they had found a writing desk and a military jacket, and they had someone had written a bunch of letters where you could see "Dear Henry, Dear Sydney," and they were scattered all over the desk. And it was just like, and it's sort of painful for me because there's nothing like that going on here in New York. And I would love to go and like see one of these shop fronts, but I think they'll all be gone by the time I'm there in May. But they are pretty incredible.
They are pretty incredible. But what that also says to me is that this novel is resonating with the booksellers if they're going that far to create those beautiful, beautiful shop fronts.
I hope that's right.
I can tell you as a bookseller that it's right.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted.
Well, and as you know, because we've sort of become acquaintances on social media, you know how much I love this book. My goal tonight is to get through this event without crying. I cannot guarantee that I'm going to be able to do it, but it moved me so tremendously, like it moved all my colleagues. So for people who are perhaps customers of the store and who have only seen my very glowing review, and haven't read anything else, can you tell us a little bit about In Memoriam?
Yes. So it is. I often describe it to people, or I used to describe it to people who didn't know anything about it. I would say it's gay poets in the trenches, and that would kind of get across the vibe. But it's really about these two friends at a boarding school in 1914, and they are very close friends, and even though they're very different. So Henry Gaunt is half German and a bit gloomy and pessimistic, and he's a bit of a pacifist, and he's always out of step with his peers. And he does not think the outbreak of war is a good thing. And he's alone in this. Everyone else at his all-boys school thinks it's incredibly exciting. They think it's like the Napoleonic Wars. They think it's going to be very, very glorious. And I mean, the Napoleonic Wars were not glorious either for those who were in it. But anyway, that's a separate thing. So his closest friend at the school, his only friend really, is Sidney Elwood. And Sidney Elwood is really different from Henry, from Gaunt. He's popular, and he's on the cricket team, and he's really excited about the war like everyone else, and he can't wait to go fight. And he is culturally Christian but ethnically Jewish, and so they have this friendship which is marked by differences, but ultimately they are incredibly close. I think because in some ways they're both romantics. I mean, like capital R romantics. Anyway, so they are also in love with each other, but they both think it is unrequited, because obviously it's 1914. They can't really express how they feel for each other. And this all becomes much more complicated when they both end up fighting at the Western Front during World War I.
Beautifully said. So what was the germ of the idea for this novel?
Well, I was trying not to write a novel when I wrote this. I had written 3 novels, and they had not amounted to anything. I hadn't been able to find an agent. And so I decided I was just going to focus on screenwriting. and I was working on a screenplay, and I got some notes on the screenplay, and that's what I was supposed to be doing. And I read Robert Graves's Goodbye to All That. That was just for fun. I was reading it. And he talks a lot about Siegfried Sassoon, the war poet Siegfried Sassoon, who went to my old school. And so I kind of, this is a classic procrastination thing. I started Googling around. I wanted to see if Siegfried Sassoon had ever written any poetry in the school newspaper while he was there. And he hadn't. But I found that they had the school newspapers all uploaded from the early part of the last century. And I read all the school newspapers from 1913 to 1919. And they were just fascinating and incredibly upsetting because they start off and it's 1913, pre-war, and it's these kind of irreverent, obnoxious, funny, charming, naive, entitled schoolboys who have every reason to believe they are going to inherit the earth. And then the war breaks out, and they are very, very excited when the war breaks out, and they all enlist. You start seeing lots of people in long lists of enlistments. Sorry, my internet might be a bit dodgy, but let me know if it does anything. Great. And then they start writing letters back to the school paper from the front where they're like, oh, it's great. Like, it's, no one's making me wash. And then they start to die. And when they die, it's their younger brothers and younger friends left at the school who are writing these obituaries, these memoriams. And so you'll get to know a boy from the way he's had to write in memoriams for various people, and then you see him go to the front, and then you see his letters, and then you see finally his in memoriam, because so many people at this school died. And the in memoriams themselves change texture as the war goes on, because at the beginning of the war, they're very, in 1914, it's very much like, we envy him his gallant death, that kind of thing. And then as they realize that the war is not going to be done by Christmas and it's just going to go on, they become much less hopeful in that sense. There's this letter from, I think, about 1915, where a student is writing back to the paper, and he says, the 16th was an awfully sad day. I had not realized what it meant to see all your friends lying dead around you. And they just become incredibly upsetting. And I think something that I often think about is that, when you read war literature, it's usually written by someone who has gone through a trauma, has processed it for 10 years, and now has written a book so that people who weren't there can understand what they went through. But these newspapers weren't like that. They were written by people who were currently undergoing a tragedy for people who were also in that tragedy with them. So they are unbelievably raw. And I was reading them, and I just started very feverishly writing the book. I think partly because I was just so upset by them. And whenever I would talk about these newspaper articles to people, they were a bit like, well, that's a downer. why are you bringing that up? And I couldn't kind of get across my feelings about these newspaper articles. So I guess I had to write a book.
Well, you got it across. I can tell you that much.
Good.
One of the most incredible parts to me of the book was your use of ephemera, specifically the prosciuttian. And here's an example from April 30th, 1915. It's the Roll of Honor, and it's 2 pages long. And it has Roll of Honor, killed in action and wounded. And then you go further back in the book, and you go to the prosciuttian from July 12th, 1916, right after the Battle of the Somme. And it's 8 pages long, and it's killed in action, died of wounds, died, wounded. And then there's the personal in memoriams. And I'm guessing that one of the reasons you put it there was so, because you end your chapters on the cliffhanger, and then you show us these pages. So I was scrabbling through trying to find the names of the characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what I want. I mean, I wanted to recreate that feeling of looking, because to a degree, I mean, obviously not the way they would have been, but I would grow attached to someone I had read about, and then I would be looking at and I'd be like, oh, he's died. you know, and it would give you this jolt. Like, for instance, Siegfried Sassoon's brother, Hamo Sassoon, was at this school. And the only anecdote I know about Hamo, I've seen a picture of him, he's very handsome. And I know that when Siegfried Sassoon confessed to his brother that he was homosexual, his brother said that he was also. And that's the only anecdote I know about Hamo Sassoon. And then I remember I was just reading through the newspaper and I found Hamo Sassoon's name, and I was just like, I was like, oh, because I don't think I hadn't realized, you know, that he died. So I just, or maybe I don't even know. It startled me, you know, and it was that I wanted to get across that feeling of looking at, you know, a wall of text and just seeing one name, and that name jumps out at you and that name startles you. So that's what I wanted to do.
Well, it was done beautifully. And I know you said in your author's note that it was a logistical nightmare.
Oh my God.
And like Maggie Hinders and the design team at Knopf, holy cow. So like, how did that work? Did you go back and forth with them to give them names to?
So in my terrible Word document that I had written this all out in obscurity, I made the newspapers. So I had these they were newspaper articles. They were in sort of text boxes that would move around. Every time I like did a new draft, the text boxes would fly around the document. And if you sent the Word document to anyone, it would just, all of the newspapers would scramble, and you would end up with the newspapers just being in the middle of a random chapter and then not where they were supposed to be. And it was absolutely awful. And it wasn't just me being an idiot. Like I got loads of people to try and send these. Anyway, point is, so I sent them as PDFs where you could kind of see them the way I had envisioned them. And Maggie Hinders looked at them, and she also looked at the original school newspapers, and she incorporated something from the school crest, which is there's this kind of acorn motif, and she took that acorn and she put it in the prosciutto, which I thought was a really lovely touch. But it's a different style. She kind of went in a completely different direction, but it was really, really satisfying because my like shabby version of this was so much worse than what she made. And but then again, you know, then it changed, as in like then if you ever wanted to, as you made edits where the newspapers, this is so boring, the newspapers would fall in different places, would mean you then had to go and add names or take away names. But for after the Battle of the Somme, what I did was I went and I counted up all the names of dead soldiers in the school papers, and they were spread out across maybe 4 issues as the news would trickle in. So I just put them all into one issue.
Okay. And so speaking of numbers, you said that at your school, when you were studying these archives, 749, sorry, flipped it. 749 staff members, students, alumni died in World War I.
Yeah, and to put that into context, the school at the moment has maybe 800 students. So that is sort of like the entire population of the school just being wiped out by a war. And something that is, they were very good about memorializing all of the war in Britain. And so the school assembly hall to this day, like the place where you go to have your assembly, is the memorial hall that was built after World War I, and it was built in order to seat the number that had been killed. So it's a very morbid assembly hall that you're sitting in. I think that definitely that kind of seeps in to the students. But that's not, I mean, I don't know if anyone here is from the UK or even from Europe, but I mean every village, every town in Britain will have a war memorial with. I mean, I was in a small town in Wales of about 1,000 people, village, I guess, and over New Year's, and they had a war memorial, and 20 young men had died in this village during World War I. And I thought to me, 20 young men in a village of 1,000 people, that's got to be most of the young men, and there's memorials all across Britain. You can't avoid them. They are so in your face. So I think, you kind of grow up in that environment. It's hard, it's very present in a way that I think it isn't in America, because you guys only shut up at the end.
Absolutely. And the thing that one of the things that just broke me was these are 17 and 18-year-old boys. And so those details, the prosciuttian, the voice that you gave to every character moved it from the academic, which is how I viewed World War I before reading this book, to the personal. And it's just such a loss. And obviously we continue to have wars and these things continue to happen, but the way you show the cost of conflict.
Well, there's a book that I keep comparing to In Memoriam, even though I think it's a sort of unexpected comparison, which is The Runaways by Fatima Bhutto. It's a book about the radicalization of Islamic youth. And the reason I compare it is that I think what she does a really amazing job of doing is showing that it's a book about 3 teenagers, and all these teenagers really want is to feel important and beautiful and special. And young people are so prone to craving to feel important and beautiful and special. And they want glory, and they want to feel like they're going to make a mark on the world. And that is what makes them so vulnerable to being manipulated by cynical older people who can send them into a war. Because it is so easy to tell any 15-year-old, like, you should go die for your country and you will never be forgotten. Because every 15-year-old just yearns to be never forgotten. Exactly. And I think that's, that's not unique to my book, and that's not unique to World War I. That's just how war works. You burn through your youth. That's what countries manage to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a very sad book, but it's also, I don't think
it's not wholly sad.
I'm getting there. Okay. It's sad, but it's tender. It's also hilarious, and it's hopeful. How did you balance that pacing?
I have a system. I send my manuscripts to a lot of friends. I'm very lucky. I have a lot of friends who are willing to read what I write, and I get a lot of help from them. It went through so many rounds, and one of the things I do like to do is I try and keep note of where my friends say they stopped reading, and wherever they stopped reading, I go in and I try and make that little clearly that's a point. If they put the book down, that means it could have been more gripping right there.
Okay.
So I wanted it to be, I really wanted it to be a fast read. I did not want it to feel like a book where you get it because it's about something serious and you should worthily read it to feel good, feel like you're educated. I want it to be easy to read.
Yeah. But it was, but you did it.
Thank you.
Just, and then there's a part where Gon and Elwood are at war and they're not together. And those chapters are 2 pages long. So we're going perspective, and it's just, it's I think the New York Times review called it, you're pacing almost percussive in some parts. And that I felt like that when I was reading it. You did so beautifully. The pacing was phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I'm really, really glad to hear that. I wanted it to trottle on, so I'm glad that it was successful. And I think, to your point about it being funny, when you read contemporary war literature, it very often is funny. I mean, if you read the play of Journey's End, it's funny because, that's how you survive, I think people who are funny are literally more likely to survive natural disasters. So, there's a lot of gallows humor in these books. So I definitely didn't want to lose sight of that.
So on the note of part of the funny bit, can you talk about the inspiration for Gideon Devi?
Oh, Gideon Devi, he's one of my favorites. So,
friends, when you get to the part with Gideon Devi, you're going to be so happy.
So, there is a prisoner of war camp in the book. I'm not going to name specific. I don't want to get spoilers. But so I didn't know much about prisoner of war camps when I started writing the book, and I actually was quite stumped at that section at first because, growing up I had read a lot about World War One, so I knew I could basically write out a sketchy version of what it would be like to fight at the front just from having read like a lot of war poetry. But there's not that much information about prisoner of war camps, and so I started studying this one prison called Holzminden and this very famous escape, the Holzminden prison escape. And it was, these men tunneled their way out and got, actually 10 of them got all the way back to England. And I found this picture of the tunnelers, the men who had dug the tunnel at Holzminden. And in the front row, cross-legged, was this incredibly handsome, mischievous-looking British Indian man called Errol Chunder Sen. And Errol Chunder Sen was a pilot in the British Air Force, and he was, when the tunnel that they had dug, it collapsed, he was the 12th person to go through the tunnel, and it collapsed on him, and he was stuck in there for like the whole night. And when I saw that picture of him, and he just, it was this really arresting expression. I feel like I just got a lot of, I had like a feel for this character who he just seemed like so much fun. And so obviously Gideon Devi is not Errol Chunder Sen, who's his own person, etc. But Gideon Devi in my book is this British Indian man who's a pilot in the Air Force, and he went to these fancy boarding schools. And of course he was bullied for being Indian, but the way he dealt with it was just by being incredibly kind of charmingly good-tempered and kind of going along with everything that they throw at him. And it does bother him, and you see little hints of the fact that all of this bothers him and that he kind of secretly thinks everyone's racist, but he always finds a way to disarm his bullies until ultimately they end up just kind of accepting him, and he becomes incredibly popular. So he is a key figure in this prison camp escape.
Your editor sent me the picture.
Yeah.
And he leaps off the page. He
He
leapt
does,
off the page in prose, and then you see the photo and you completely understand. It's just that section was just.
And Errol Chunder Sen, he died kind of tragically young. We don't really know how he died. He died during partition in the 40s. He was seen walking in Burma, and they just never saw him ever again. So it's very sad. You just don't know what happened, and that almost feels kind of, partition was such a disastrous, bloody mess that was caused almost entirely by the British. So it's very sad to think of that as being that man's ending, and there's so little known about him beyond Holzminden. So yeah, it was that.
It was great. I mean, I'm so excited that you found that inspiration, because it enhanced the story so much, and following Devi's story for the rest of the book was just fabulous. Really brought me a lot of joy. So there's a bunch of questions piling up. I've got 2 questions from the audience asking about the audiobook narrator, Christian. I'm going to let you answer it, but they're wondering, how did you work with him? Did you pick him to be the narrator? How did that go?
Is my internet working?
It's a little dodgy.
I just lost you for a second.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Alice, can you hear me? Alice is, are you back?
I think I'm back. Hello?
Hello?
Is this better?
That's good.
Okay, yes. So the question was about the audiobook narrator. How did I choose him?
Yep.
Well, I was sent a bunch of samples, and Christian Coulson, like, his voice jumped out at me. In fact, what I said to my husband was, I was like, I think when I read out loud, this is the voice in my head I always think I'm going to read with, but then in this stupid little girly voice comes out instead. Anyway, so I picked him, and then afterwards I realized that he plays Tom Riddle in the second Harry Potter book, and I was like, oh, he's really, really good at acting as well. Like, that's great. And he's so cool. So I was like, oh God, I want to be friends with him. I haven't met him. I'd like to.
Maybe when you go over in May, if he's still there.
I think he lives here. I think he's in San Diego right now, and he's going to be in a play.
Well,
So
we'll
if you're in
need
San
to maybe-
Diego, go to the
we'll
play.
need to get the two of you to meet at some point.
Yes.
We will will that to
Indeed.
happen.
But yeah, I think he's probably done a very good job of the audiobook. I'm really excited to listen to it.
Yeah, I started listening to it, but then kind of did a deep dive into a lot of your press coverage. So I look forward to doing that as I move forward.
Mhm.
By the way, your press coverage
Oh,
is so good.
Yeah.
So friends, if you don't know, rave reviews, NPR story, New York Times story and review, starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Book List, and I can't remember the third one, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, Kirkus.
yeah.
I'm so happy for you. I'm
No,
so
it's
happy
been-
for you.
It's been incredible. I mean, honestly, it's literally like if you were lying in bed fantasizing about what you would hope would happen to a book when you published it, like this is what would happen. So it's been really, really surreal and strange and magical. I'm incredibly surprised and grateful.
Tell you something. I am not surprised. I'm not.
No.
I read this back in November and I knew it was special. And to
Well, thank
see
you.
other people recognizing it as special is one of the joys of being a bookseller.
Well, that's lovely.
It really is. So here's a question. What was your favorite part of writing In Memoriam?
Oh God, I loved the whole thing. I really, really it was, I'd written 3 books before this and I had not enjoyed them. And I've been working on a book now for 2 years that I don't want to go into because it's terrible, but I don't usually enjoy things this much. And I just, it came really easily. I think the ending was hard and some of the battle scenes were hard, but I don't know. No, it really flowed very easily.
Again, it feels like it's, how do I say this? One of the things that I love about reading a new book is when you read it and you feel like it's sprung from the head of the author, like Athena sprung from Zeus's head.
I wouldn't go that far.
No, but like, no, but it feels organic. It feels like, I know there are seams. I know there are scaffolds. I know you worked really, really hard for years, but because it's so beautifully done, I don't see them.
Well, that's lovely to hear. I'm glad. Thank you.
You are welcome. But I got that feeling. So I'm so glad that it was a pleasurable experience for you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question. Can you talk about or share any resources you used to research LGBTQ plus history during this time period?
Yeah, one of the best books that I read about this, I stumbled on it when I was reading like an academic journal on JSTOR or something about, homosexuality at the front, because I was, I was logging in and looking at like critical theory and all that kind of stuff. And someone just name dropped this book called Alf by Bruno Vogel that I had never heard of. And I tracked down a translation. It has been translated once, like in the 70s or 80s. And, I had to order a copy from Australia from a secondhand bookshop, and it was really expensive. And it was, anyway, but the point is, it's this incredible book, which is, it's by Bruno Vogel, who was a gay man who was a soldier in World War One. And it's the story of these 2 teenage boys who are in a, happy and consensual love affair together when one of them goes to the front. And then the rest of the novel is basically told through their letters to each other. And it came out in 1929 and then was pretty much just buried by the Nazis. And Bruno Vogel left, thank goodness, before it was too late. And then he moved to, I think, to South Africa, where he spent pretty much the rest of his life fighting apartheid. So he was a very interesting person. Unfortunately, the only translation is really bad. So I wish someone would do another translation. But yeah, that was a really, really good one. And most of the war poets, the British war poets, were queer. So you can you can try and read into that. I have to say, especially people will sometimes try and read into Sassoon's poetry. You can a bit. He doesn't really put much in his poetry, I think. I found other sources more useful. For instance, a source that was really useful for the boarding school section and trying to figure out what the rules of homosexuality were in these boarding schools was reading Alec Waugh's The Loom of Youth. So Alec Waugh is Evelyn Waugh's older brother, and he was expelled from Sherborne for sort of homosexual exploits. And he immediately wrote this like tell-all autobiographical memoir novel called The Loom of Youth, and which, by the way, enraged Evelyn Waugh because it meant that he couldn't go to the school, which was his top choice school. Anyway, a separate thing. And The Loom of Youth so he wrote it when he was 17, right before he went off to go fight at the Battle of Passchendaele, I think, in 1917. And in it there was, you have to kind of know what you're looking for, but there's this definite sense of, if you're popular, you can get away with stuff. If you're on a good sports team, you can get away with stuff. Crucially, if no one knows, you can get away with stuff. And then also in Goodbye to All That, Robert Graves does talk about the kind of ubiquity of these inter-boy relationships, especially with a younger boy and an older boy. So yeah, it is crumbs when it comes to research. There's also J.R. Ackerley, who I wasn't able to read because he wrote this play called The Prisoners of War that would have been really useful for my research, but I wasn't able to find a copy of it that I could afford at the time because it was very hard to source. So I wasn't able to read that. I'd like to read it now. If now I'm in New York, I might be able to find a copy more easily.
Or even at a library.
There wasn't one in the LA library because it was a lot of these books are, like The Loom of Youth, the copy I found was very much like someone had printed it in his backyard.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe is there I don't know, MC Brickell, you're on the call, you're in library school, let's see what you can do. You can make any things happen, you let me know. MC is a great friend of the store. She's in graduate school for library science now, so I'm tasking her with that for you. Mm-hmm. Here's another question. Do you have, or did you have, a favorite side character to write about?
Well, I love Debbie, obviously. I know what my answer to this is. My husband has a very niche favorite character, which is there's this character called Gosset, and Gosset is this very excitable 14-year-old duke, and he's incredibly excited to go to war. And when he gets to the front, he's like, oh, wow, bombs, cool. He's like so excited. He's like, oh, is that a dead body? Wow, can I touch it? He's just in the way. Everyone's like, Gosset, oh my God, go away, you're gonna get killed. So he was fun. He was fun to write, definitely. I mean, I honestly really liked all the characters. Maud was really, really interesting. She's, pretty much the only female character apart from Elwood's mother. Yes. Oh, and there's also Elspeth. There's a few female characters, but Maud is I would say the principal female character, because this is really a story mainly about masculinity. And I kind of got her DNA from Vera Brittain, who wrote Testament of Youth. And so Maud is this very politically active young woman who I think is incredibly frustrated, I think like many women were, by how little she feels like she's able to kind of make a difference. And that she ends up joining as a nurse, which I think makes her feel a lot better. But there was pressure for a lot of these women to not be nurses and instead to stay at home and take care of their families and do home things. So she kind of needs nursing I think she sees nursing as almost like an escape from quite oppressive feminine roles that she would otherwise be thrust into.
I loved her, and there's so much about her that we can't talk about on the call that I really...
Right, because of spoilers.
Right, and this is a no spoiler zone. you handled that beautifully. I will also just say I had a great fondness for Hayes also.
Oh yeah. Oh, I liked him a lot. So Hayes is this. He's a working class officer, which is in the book a bit of a rarity. And I think there was this idea, certainly at the beginning of the war, that an officer was a gentleman, an officer and a gentleman. And so Hayes, he suffers a lot from the fact that he is not like the other officers who all went to the same, 25 private schools. And, the officers had to have their own uniforms made, and he doesn't have money. So he has a bad tailor. And all the other officers are always being like, God, look at his tailor. Why is his uniform so bad? And he keeps not getting promoted because he's got the wrong kind of clothes and he's got the wrong kind of accent, even though he's like a really, really effective, good officer. And it's infuriating for him. He's older than these boys as well. And it's really hard for him to have a friendship with his fellow officers because of this class divide.
Yeah. And I really liked the way that Hayes allowed you to explore that class divide. I appreciated that. I really appreciated that. Let's see. Question, how is Colonel Witterson's doing?
He's great. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Here's another question. Are you doing any in-person book tours?
I am going to the UK in May, late May. The details are on my website, which I took forever to put up, but it is now up, and it has an extended historical note. So there's because I sent
longer
them
than the book.
Oh, much longer. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
yay.
Because I sent them originally this like 12-page historical note, and they were like, "Well, that's great, but
paper costs money."
Yes. So it's all done. But yeah. So May in the UK is the only thing I have in the books at the moment. But who knows?
Well, this is what's going to happen. First of all, Caroline is going to, if she doesn't find it before the event ends, she's going to find that link to the historical note and we'll send it to all of y'all. But what's going to happen is that this book is going to be so incredibly popular that you're going to do a massive paperback tour. I am predicting it already.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. Karen is like, please come to Blue Willow in person. Yes, I would like that.
Well, I would love to. Yeah,
it would be wonderful. Here's a question. Can you talk, like, what made you decide to write a queer romance in the story?
Well, people keep asking me that, and I think it came very naturally out of the source material I was reading. As I said, so many of these writers were queer. And also, my entry point to a degree was Robert Graves' Goodbye to All That. And I am not saying that Sassoon and Robert Graves were in love with each other or anything like that. But they did have this weird, slightly tainted friendship. And one of them at some point said that it was a heavily sexual friendship, as in there was that kind of atmosphere in it. And the letters that they write each other are very, very loaded. And I think one of the first things I wrote, so the first thing I did was I mocked up some newspapers. And then the second thing I did is I just wrote, and these didn't make it into the book, but I just wrote 2 letters, a letter from one character and a letter to another, and one was at war and one was not. There was so much that neither of them was saying. And it was very clear that they were both in love with each other, but neither of them had talked about it. And that was just the first thing I wrote. And then I wrote the book really fast. So most of the book I wrote in about 2 weeks. So most of it, and then I edited it for 1.5 years.
Right. But still, for it to come to you like that is something.
No, it came very fast. But so I guess what I mean is it's not that I was like, oh, well, what would work here? Okay, we could do a straight thing, or we could do a gay thing, or we could do it just kind of popped out like that, Like
Athena out of Zeus's head.
Yes, exactly like that.
Here is a reader from India saying hello and absolutely agrees that The Runaways. Okay, Caroline, you did that so fast I can't see the question anymore. The Runaways was such a heartbreaking book with its sheer honesty. I hope you know how absolutely lovely your writing is. Please never stop writing. They would like a community read online like this one after their copy reaches them to scream about all their favorite parts. Alvika, I'm on board. I'll do it with you if no one else will. We'll make it happen.
That's so kind. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so that is absolutely lovely. Someone wants to know, what do you do for inspiration while you're writing?
Oh, well, that's a bad question to ask me right now. I've been feeling unbelievably uninspired. I do really like, I think it's Ray Bradbury has some advice where he's like, if you're not feeling inspired, like just stop working. Just don't work, just relax. I definitely think that right now we're really obsessed with sort of effectiveness and productivity, and obviously, of course, you have to be dedicated, and you can't just be like, well, I'll write when the inspiration hits and then just never write. But on the other end of things, you can't treat writing like, licking envelopes or checking boxes. It comes when it comes, to a degree, obviously. Yeah, I guess I don't really have a good answer to you on that. If any of you are writers who are seeking inspiration, my advice is to read and chill out, basically.
Well, I mean, look what happened when you went down a rabbit hole and read 6 or 7 years of that newspaper.
Well, I was just procrastinating on work as well.
Right, so you were procrastinating on work,
right.
but then it came.
So my advice to you is don't do your work, procrastinate, and yeah, just go on the internet, see what happens.
Who do you relate to more, Gaunt or Elwood?
Oh, I like that question. I relate to both of them a lot. I think I have the same flaws as both the characters. So Gaunt is a bit of a pessimist, and I think he can be a bit selfish in his pessimism, and that he can kind of just get grumpy for no good reason and stay there. And I'm like that. And I think Elwood is pretentious and selfish, and that's me too. Don't argue with me. I know myself.
I'm not. Okay, I respect that, and I will go with it. That is fine. But we're nearing the end of our time. This was stunning. I have told you that over and over again. Attendees, if you have not read this book, get yourself to an independent bookstore. If you live in Houston, come see us, because we've got a pile and we are going to sell this all the live long day. This is a stunning book, Alice.
Thank you so much.
I am a different person because I have read this book. So thank you. I really, really appreciate your creativity, your imagination, your wisdom, and your talent. Thank you.
Gosh, that's really lovely. Thank you so much. I'm sort of bewildered, but thank you.
You are welcome. So now we told you there was a signature question.
Yes.
Here's the signature question. We talk about books at the store as being books of our heart. Like, this is now going to be one of the books of my heart. I had different books of my heart when I was a child, when I was in school, when I was a young parent, now as an old parent. Can you tell us one book of your heart from some point in your life?
I really like that. That's a very good way of getting around the what are your favorite books question, which I can never answer, because the answer to what are your favorite books is that I have like 45 favorite books and I can't prioritize one or the other. Because
not asking for that.
Okay, so a book of the heart from some period or another. When I was a teenager, I really, really loved Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which I used to carry around with me when I would go traveling anywhere. I would bring it with me. It's quite big, and it's got 1,000 characters. It's World War II, and it's really funny. I mean, it is so funny. And I didn't read it in order. I would just open up the book at some point and start reading it as if it was sort of a collection of poems or something. Which means that it wasn't until years later that I found the ending, and the ending is phenomenal. But it's not funny. It's kind of terrible and joyful at once, but it's really not. It's deadly serious. And it was a real shock to me because I had thought this book is so funny, and it is, but it's also it's profoundly serious. It is sexist, but it's sexist in a way that personally I can kind of handle. It's a lot of just like, well, women with their boobs, and I'm like, that's okay. So just, be prepared, but I was fine with it. So that is, I wouldn't, say that was my favorite book, but I would say it was a book of the heart for several years, several formative years. I really like that question.
That's a perfect answer. And it's a perfect way for us to wrap up. People who joined us from around the country and around the world, thank you so much. You'll see an email from me in your inbox sometime tomorrow. If you don't see it there, check your spam folders. It'll have all these wonderful links. Alice, thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say, I have Instagram. If you have any questions that weren't able to be answered, like do send me a DM. I can't guarantee I'll see it, but if I do, I will definitely try and answer it. I want to be able to talk to people who like the book. So thank you so much for having me, Kathy. This has been very, very affirming. So thank you. It's been lovely.
I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased. Everybody, I'll have her socials linked in the email as well. Everyone have a wonderful day, evening, whatever else, whatever time of day it is, night. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Alice, this is a stunner. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.